Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Vladimir Putin's announcement that he was ordering the withdrawal of military assets from Syria was just as surprising as when he informed the world of Russia's intention to intervene months ago. Even some of Putin's harshest critics at home and abroad admit Russia's military mission has been a success. But will that be enough to win a lasting peace for sovereign Syria? To CrossTalk Syria, I'm joined by my guest, Earl Rasmussen in Washington. He's the Executive Vice President of the Eurasian Center. Also in Washington, we have James Jatras. He is a former advisor to the U.S. Senate Republican leadership. And in London, we cross to Marcus Papadopoulos. He's the editor of Politics First magazine. All right, gentlemen, CrossTalk rules. In fact, that means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much appreciate it. Marcus, if I can go to you first in London. President Putin made a startling announcement, at least for most of us on Monday, about the withdrawal of Russian military assets from Syria. I would assess it as a very effective, smart military campaign towards the goal of a diplomatic and political settlement. They worked hand in hand. As we speak right now, it has worked out rather well, even brilliantly. Go ahead, Marcus.
Well, first of all, I think we should pay tribute and appreciation to both the Russian government and the Russian military for having achieved a decisive turning point against terrorism in Syria. Because of the heroic and bold efforts of the Russian military contingent in Syria, ISIS, al-Nusra and all the other Islamist terrorist groups, including the so-called Free Syrian Army, are now on the road to defeat. And that is a wonderful thing for the people of Syria. And it's also a wonderful thing for people outside of Syria, because, of course, ISIS and al-Nusra, they threaten not just the people of Syria, but the wider world. But yes, I definitely do believe that because of the Russian military campaign, there will be at some point peace in Syria. The Syrian military every single day is advancing up and down Syria, liberating Syrian territory from the tyranny of Islamist rule. So there's no doubt about it that from a military perspective, the ball is now in the court of the Syrian military. They are now pressing ahead to achieve a decisive victory. And as you said, Peter, that works hand in hand with peace efforts, because, of course, other terrorist groups, they can see the writing on the wall, and they know no longer will they be able to overthrow the Syrian government and impose an Islamist regime in Syria.
Earl, if I can go to you in Washington, the United Nations Special Representative on Syria says there's no plan B. The only alternative to what's going on in Geneva is more war. What do you think about the prospects for peace now? Because Russia went in there with very limited goals. Putin said that they had achieved more or less what they wanted, and now he's withdrawing. How does this bode for the Geneva process? Go ahead, Earl.
Peter, thanks. Actually, I think, one, I need to commend President Putin's initiative, both going in and his timing to begin to extract as well. I think was very, very much, and I think the country in general would have fallen apart, similar to Libya and other areas, had that intervention not take place. Now, what does this mean as far as the peace process? I think, especially the timing with his announcement Monday on withdrawing, I think we've created an environment where there is potential hope. I'm not going to say that it will be, but there is potential. And without these actions that have occurred, I think the peace negotiations would have been destined to fail if they even would have occurred to begin with. But I think there is hope, and I think it provides a path to move forward. It may take more time than we think, but I think it's a positive move and at least gives an opportunity.
James, I think it's a brilliant move for so many different reasons. I can enumerate some of them. The decision was done unilaterally. That means that they unilaterally can come back, of course, with the Syrian government's permission. If the Americans want to replace the Russians, well, they can butt heads with the Iranians and Hezbollah. I doubt they want to do that, considering their record in the region over the last 15 15 years. Also, the weaponization of migration, that mantra in Western media will quickly die. That a ridiculous theory, but you no longer will be able to blame the Russians for Europe's migration crisis. And also, lastly, very importantly, is that the Russians can say that they had gone in with a very limited mandate and they've withdrawn. I mean, you can use military power in a smart way. We haven't seen that for a very long time. Go ahead.
That's right. I listened very carefully to the announcement on Monday, and of course you notice that the Russian side is saying that they are going to continue operations at the Tartus naval base and the Khmeimim air base. So the Russians have shown the stick. They've been using the stick for the last few months. Now they're offering a carrot to not only the United States, but to our so-called allies like Saudi Arabia and Turkey. If they want a face-saving way to back down, if they want an exit ramp, that their regime change policy is not going to work, Russians politically now are giving them an opportunity while still maintaining the capability for military pressure.
You know, Marcus, it's really quite brilliant. It took the Russian side to give American allies in the region a way out of their disastrous regime policy approach for the last 5 years. It's really quite brilliant. You know, Vladimir Putin may have just saved the political career of Erdogan and maybe saved the existence of the Saudi royal family. I'm sure we will never hear any thank yous, though. Go ahead.
Well, I think one of the bizarre things is that as a parliamentary journalist myself, I've been sitting in on the discussions on Syria and the Russian military campaign in Syria in the House of Commons. And you know, Peter, it's not surprising, but there hasn't been one recognition expressed, well, none that I've seen when I've been in the chamber, that the Russian military campaign has resulted in ISIS starting to crumble in Syria. In fact, the politicians I've been watching in the chamber have said that it's the American military air campaign which is responsible for ISIS crumbling. So it's a complete distortion of the truth. But I really would like to clarify something, Peter, because I've noticed since the announcement that the Russian military will start to reduce its presence in Syria, I've noticed a lot of concerns on social media from people that Russia, quote, is abandoning Syria. The Russian military, the Russian military presence will remain in Syria. The naval base is permanent. The air base is permanent. It's just that there's going to be a reduction in the equipment. And what I would say to countries like Turkey, which has caused so much of the bloodshed in Syria, Turkey, my message to you is this. The S-400 air defence system, the Pantsir air defence system, will remain there permanently. So if Turkey ever chooses to violate Syrian airspace again, they will be up against two of the most potent air defence systems in the world. So in short, the Russian military presence in Syria is permanent. Russia is not going anywhere.
Well, and we have to point out the Caspian Sea is right there. We've seen how missiles can be fired from the Caspian very easily. I mean, Russia demonstrated that it has really quite amazing military regional global power right now. Earl, if I can go to you, I'm glad Marcus brought this up here because before the program I went through the major Western media outlets, you know, and all of it is this is a message to Assad. No, it's not. It's not. We do know, if you look at the foreign ministry website here in Russia, that there was consultations all the time between the Russian government and the government in Damascus here. Assad is not surprised by this whatsoever. He was probably the first to know. So again, you know, this echo that, you know, it's all this is an American initiative. The Russians are backing down. They're afraid of a quagmire. All of these things you can read in between the lines, and none of them have any basis in truth. Go ahead.
Peter, I completely agree. Actually, if you look at what Putin said last fall, he actually said his objective is, yes, to combat terrorism there, but basically to stabilize this legitimate Syrian government and to provide a framework for peace negotiations and for a political settlement. And that's exactly what has happened. Yeah. And I think he's actually, as either Marcus or James had mentioned, I think withdrawing and making this step that he's announced Monday is really sending more of a signal to the other participants that, hey, I want to give this a chance. I want peace to occur. And I think this is a positive move, and it actually is a very, very good, and it's success, not any type of non-success. It's a very, very positive direction.
Okay, James, I'm going to ask you a hypothetical, theoretical here, because none of us really have any concrete information about what I'm going to ask it. Do you think a grand bargain has been made? We know that Putin and Obama talked. Do you think that, somehow saying, he got some kind of promise for whatever it's worth from that president, that they'll go along with the follow Russia's lead with the peace talks in Geneva? What's your gut feeling? Go ahead.
Well, Peter, let me give you the bad news, because I did notice those references on Monday that there had been communication with Washington, specifically with President Obama. And I guess if I were in the Russian shoes, I would be very cautious about whatever assurances they receive from him. We know that opinion in Washington, in the apparat here, is divided. And maybe Mr. Obama would like to find some way to slink out of the failure of his Syrian policy, even as he keeps saying Assad must go, Assad must go. But there are some people here who have not given up on regime change. We don't know what the Saudis and the Turks really will do, whether they're smart enough to take the exit ramp. We know that Erdogan is a particularly unpredictable and frankly erratic character, whether they will try to take this as an opportunity to rebuild their forces, to try to push for so-called Plan B on partition of Syria. We're not out of the woods yet. The Russians have given the opportunity. Obviously, this is not designed to put pressure on the Syrian government, but to put pressure on the rebels to decide, do you want to be part of a negotiation process, or do you want to die with Al-Qaeda and Daesh? So let's see if people are smart enough to take the lifeline they were given, much as Obama was, as it turns out, smart enough to take the lifeline in 2013 over the chemical weapons.
Okay, gentlemen, I'm going to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Russia's successful diplomacy in the Middle East. Stay with RT.
I love it.
Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing how Russia's Syria policy is evolving. Okay, Marcus, if I can go back to you in London, there's one word that still haunts a lot of this, what's going on right now, and it's that word partition. Again, I think that's one of the reasons why Vladimir Putin decided to downgrade Russia's military presence there, because as things were going, even though the Syrian government with Russian air power and Hezbollah and Iran were making progress, as you pointed out in the first half of the program, there was a way that some people would say they're hardening of lines of a partition inside a de facto partition that was being created in Syria. Now, with the Russians withdrawing and saying, no, we have a signpost. It's called Geneva. And if you want to live through all of this, you better be on the right side of those lines, because those lines are not going to last. Syria will remain a sovereign state as it exists right now on the map. And I think that's a really important thing that the Russians have done, because one of the reasons they went in, not only for national security issues, but also for the sanctity of borders under the United Nations Charter. And I think that's another reason why Vladimir Putin thought it was a good time to take a step back, take a breath, and show everybody in the world, if you use military power smart, you can be effective at the negotiating table. Go ahead.
Well, I think we should be careful about our wording. Of course, Russia isn't withdrawing from the Middle East. It's just limiting its equipment and its personnel there. But I really, really sincerely hope that the peace process works. But you know, Peter, I'm still concerned. I'm still sceptical. Yeah. Why am I concerned? Why am I sceptical? Because the West and its regional allies have still not relinquished their objective of seeing the overthrow of the Syrian government. And the evidence of that is that they are still providing military assistance to Islamist fighters and jihadists. Look, Turkey is a staunch ally and friend to America. The Turkish border with Syria remains open. Islamist fighters and jihadists are still crossing every day into Syria. So if the Americans were really, really committed to a peace process, they would tell Turkey, which in effect is a puppet of America, to close its border. But that's not what's happening. So regrettably, while Russia is demonstrating that it's a force for good in the Middle East and America is a malignant force in the Middle East, unfortunately, I'm still concerned about a peace process.
Okay, Marcus, if I go to Earl in Washington, your concerns are absolutely valid. We've seen double-crossing and changing of words and throwing away agreements that were made in the past. Earl, one of the things, again, this unilateral with limitation, Marcus is right, okay, with taking a small step back here. But one of the things is that because it was unilateral, Russia can come back in. I think Marcus has very good, valid concerns. I mean, if the Turks and the Saudis want to create a lot of trouble, the Russians can come back and they can clobber anybody they want there. I think Russia is saying, we're trying to go down this path here, but if you don't want to join us, we do still consider reintroducing our forces into that theater, and they will do it, okay? We have a moment. Everybody has this moment here. Let's see who grasps it. Go ahead, Earl.
Yes, Peter, it's true. I think with the withdrawal here it's limited withdrawal. It's a major withdrawal, but he's still maintaining a military presence at the naval base and at the air base, and easily can go back in. I think Mr. Putin's in Russia is giving an opportunity here and an encouragement, but they've also made a point that they play a role in the Middle East there and have strategic interests, and they want peace and they want settlement, and we'll have that opportunity. But I completely agree with Marcus's. You need to be cautious. There's a lot of players. There's internal discussions going back on both sides within the U.S. here, and you've got Turkey and Saudi Arabia as all that have their positions as well. So there's a lot there. Obviously, Islamic State is probably the biggest threat to everyone, and who knows which direction that'll take as well.
Hey, James, I'm really glad that Earl mentioned that because, again, if you read Western media and listen to their governments, it's all about Assad, it's about Russian intervention, and they keep forgetting what the real problem in that country, in Iraq, and going into other countries in the region. There just seems to be no real concern about it, okay? They're just pointing fingers, who's to blame? They don't want to blame the illegal invasion and occupation of Iraq. No one wants to go there, except for, maybe Donald Trump, which is a different topic for a different program here. I mean, this is why I think all of us are so very skeptical, because Western powers, particularly Washington, don't really want to focus on what the real problem is and why we have such a horrific civil war going on in Syria with a horrific humanitarian crisis. Go ahead.
Absolutely. I must say, when Marcus said that Turkey is a puppet of the United States, the first thought that came to my mind sitting here in Washington is that, often it seems the other way around, that the American government is a puppet of Riyadh and Ankara, who spend billions of dollars in this town peddling influence with American politicians, most of whom would not know an American national interest if it walked up and bit them. You hear over and over again, we have to maintain the credibility with our Sunni allies. We take our cues from them about what should be our regional interests, which are really their political agendas. We saw this in Libya. We saw this in Iraq. We see this now in Syria. And what does the United States get out of this? It's been a disaster for the United States, yet we continue down the same road, mouthing the same slogans, Assad must go and so forth. That's why I hope there's a chance that this turns into something positive. But like I say, we're not there yet.
Okay. Marcus, one of the interesting things here is that Russian statecraft, diplomacy, has demonstrated that military power and diplomacy can work hand in hand. Now, this is something that's been absent in American foreign policy for a very, very long time. And I think this is also something that can be demonstrated that, things can be done differently. We know, as we speak right now, Russian diplomats are working with all regional players. If they get along or not, they're talking to everybody that's involved in here, all legitimate partners, I should point out here. This is something the U.S. doesn't seem to be able to grasp anymore, because if you read the Jeffrey Goldberg article, The Obama Doctrine, which I don't expect viewers to spend too much time with it. It's very, very long. It's two odd bedfellows sleeping together, talking under the pillows. It's really kind of a disgusting article here. But one thing you came away from it, is that there's nobody in the U.S. administration that's responsible for what they've done in Syria. No one is responsible, including the President of the United States. He just throws his arms up in the air. He blames everyone else. Go ahead.
I believe, Peter, that history will judge Russia very positively in its intervention in Syria, because the Russian military campaign, it was always going to be limited, and it was pinpointing terrorists, be it ISIS, be it al-Nusra, or be it elements of the Free Syrian Army. And at the same time, simultaneously, Russian diplomats have been working around the clock to try and secure a ceasefire. And let's not forget, the ceasefire which we have in parts of Syria, of course only in parts of Syria, was largely a result of Russian actions. Now, Western media, certainly British mainstream media, is accrediting America for the ceasefire, which is absolute ludicrous. But also, you know, history is repeating itself. Yes, we had the illegal invasion and occupation of Iraq, but America's malignant behaviour occurred well before Iraq. It began in the 1990s in the former Yugoslavia. Yep. Yugoslavia, like Syria, was a very, very complex country. The Americans wrecked the former Yugoslavia, and that was the precedent. That's when that's when NATO went on the offensive, bombing the Bosnian Serbs, and then Yugoslavia was bombed in '99 over Kosovo. So there's a whole litany of countries that America has absolutely devoured, from the former Yugoslavia to Iraq to Libya to Syria. Let's not forget Ukraine. Ukraine is a country which is edging ever closer to becoming a failed state, and this is all because of the short-term, reckless behaviour of America. And they have the audacity, certainly in Britain, in the House of Commons, to blame Russia for the conflict in Syria. It's a complete distortion. But that's why this programme, CrossTalk, is wonderful, because it sends out the correct message to people watching, the truth. Well,
Marcus, thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate that. Earl, kind of spinning off what Marcus had to say there, I mean, if hypothetical again, if this works in the right direction, could we see a thaw in relations, Western relations with Russia? Because it seems to me, again, I asked about the grand bargain. I asked James about it, because Ukraine does come up here. And we do know that the Americans and the Russians are talking about Ukraine, because Ukraine is just turning into a failed state. Nobody wants that. The Ukrainians don't want it. The Europeans don't want it. Russia doesn't want it, okay? And I have to wonder, is the deal as you push the Ukrainian government in Kiev to finally implement Minsk II? Because that will start the process of at least stop the bleeding, the hemorrhaging that Ukraine is experiencing here. Because if the Americans and the Russians can work together in such a complicated country as Syria, they certainly can do it in Ukraine. What do you think?
That's a good point, Peter. Obviously, there's different political agendas that go on. Yeah. But I think if something can happen in Syria, at least it might show the true interest that Russia does have is, and I think it's evident in Syria, to stop the violence and maintain stability of the government, and to come to some type of political situation. I think also as we kind of sidetrack a little bit here on the Ukraine, it's a similar. Russia does not want violence in Ukraine. However, they don't want to be having a potential threat right on their border. And obviously, I think for everyone, especially Ukrainian people, having a stable environment is positive. And I think implementing the Minsk II agreement provides the best hope for that. And hopefully, if this situation evolves in Syria, that gives an example and a framework for all sides to participate in Ukraine, which is a travesty what has happened there, but to move forward there to stabilize the situation and provide those people with hope as well.
All right, gentlemen, hope was the last word heard on this program. We've run out of time. Many thanks to my guests in Washington and in London. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, CrossTalk rules.
Sì, anzi mondo. Scientist. I love you.